All right, Amy, people are gonna come in here, are already starting to flood in here. So take it away and let's get this call started.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy you could join us tonight. And I think this is going to be a really important and interesting call with David Trahan, the Executive Director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Amy may have frozen there. Oh, there you are.
Oh, no, only look frozen, I guess.
No, you froze at my end for a minute.
Oh, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Stand with Maine is an initiative of the Maine chapter of American Promise, an organization founded in 2016 by Jeff Clements, whose goal is to organize and empower Americans to win the 28th Amendment to the US Constitution, which would give a voice back to individuals so that we the people, not big money, corporations, unions, super PACs, or special interest groups, are back in charge of our democracy. In 2013, the Maine legislature passed a resolution supporting an amendment to the United States Constitution regarding campaign finance that would reaffirm the power of citizens through their government to regulate the raising and spending of money in elections, and calling for each member of the Maine congressional delegation to actively support and promote in Congress an amendment to the United States Constitution on campaign finance. The effort behind this resolution was cross-partisan, with Ed Youngblood, a Republican, Dick Woodbury, an independent, and Diane Russell, a Democrat, all leading the charge. Our chapter honored all three former legislators in a Stand with Maine kickoff event in Brewer this past January. We're thrilled to have support for Stand with Maine from both Dave as an individual and from the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine as an organization. And now we'll hear a little bit from Jeff.
Well, thank you, Amy, and hello, everybody. Nice to see all the folks on the call and all the people who will see this on our YouTube channel and on the Stand with Maine webpage. This is a regular meeting in some ways for the Maine Stand with Maine statewide group leading this effort, and it's citizen driven, it's all volunteer. And we are bringing Mainers together from all over the state, all over the political spectrum, all walks of life to get this done. So if you would like to join this anytime, sign up at standwithmaine.org, and we'll help get this big work that Amy described so well done and put power back in the hands of Mainers, not out of state and a very small select group of people who can spend millions and millions of dollars influencing our elections. My background is in Maine, and it's always good to be here and to work with Mainers around the state, because it's, it's a rare, David and I talked about this when he was good enough to have me on the radio show, the Sportsman's Alliance, together. And before that, when we were talking, but Maine is still a place where people work together to do what's right. Not much patience for partisan, I guess we can say BS and, things like that. And so Stand with Maine is really exactly in the spirit of Maine. We got a big problem in this country, and we gotta fix it. So we're doing it. David Trahan is, as Amy said, a real leader in this state. Now he's executive director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. Their Institute for Legislative Action has supported this campaign, and which we're very grateful for that and for David's support. But he's been a leader for a while. He was in the 2 terms in the Maine Senate, 4 terms in the Maine House. He's a logger by trade in Waldoboro. And I know he doesn't go around trying to gather the titles like executive director and senator and things like that. They come to him because he is a leader and wades in. He has a powerful grassroots organizing experience and skill. And I think that really speaks to not only his success, but I've come to know him and admire his really deeply felt need and or belief that people should have the power, and his empowerment approach to politics and life, I think, is really inspiring. So, David, thank you for joining us. Welcome to our conversation. And let me just ask you, what brought you to this work? And actually, before I let you answer that, let me also introduce people may be seeing on the screen the Patriots fan there. And that, of course, is former state senator, another great leader in this state, Roger Katz. And Roger, thank you for your leadership on this. You and Amy and the folks on the call are going to be part of this conversation, and just weigh in any time. But we're going to give David a chance to ask that question I gave him, which is, what brought you to this constitutional amendment? That is a big, big deal. Working to get it done. Why?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in one of what I believe is the most important things we need to do for our republic right now, is to get a handle on the grotesque amounts of money that are coming in to buy elections in sovereign states that should be able to govern themselves. We're supposed to have that right under our Constitution. And I'll answer your question now, because I think it's important you understand why I want to be involved. I want to be a patriot and support this effort. And I want it to be done. I'm a product of grassroots campaigns. When I started in politics 2.5 decades ago, I started working on referendums. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but referendums are the purest form of democracy as part of a republic. You go out, you gather signatures, you build an effort, you're passionate about what you believe in, and you go out there and participate. And I've worked on now, I believe it's 13 referendums, of which several I've been a leader on. And to me, that's where my passion comes from, is being part of the grassroots. In the last 5 to 10 years, what I've seen is the ability for individuals to influence their elections and what's going on in their state is getting minimized by the grotesque amounts of money that are coming in, buying up the airwaves, the messaging, and taking over our elections to promote a few individuals' agenda. And it's really making it hard to self-govern. I would say to anybody listening right now, have you had enough of the ads that you're hearing everywhere you go? You can't pick up your phone, you can't go to Facebook, you can't go on TV without hearing this onslaught of ads in June. And so we only know it's going to get worse. I think people are going to tune out and they're not going to participate. We're not going to hear from the candidates their positions on issues. We're not going to be informed on what their solutions are to problems. People from New York and California are dictating to us what we hear on our own airwaves in our state. An extension of that is, absent the ability to have a good campaign, a good grassroots campaign where each candidate is out there articulating their messages and their policies, we're going to be stuck with a few people from places like California and New York electing our candidates, dictating to us the laws that we're going to live under, when they will never be affected in their own states by what they're promoting here. So for that reason and many more reasons, I think we have to get this under control. If we don't, I would ask your listeners, what stops anyone from around the world funneling money through states and through organizations into the United States, into individual states, to dictate to us the laws that we live under? And when we lose our grassroots component and the individualism that goes along with your vote as a citizen, whether it's liberal or conservative or somewhere in between, that all gets drowned out by all of this money. Roger Katz, you're on this call, you know it. Anyone that's participated in elections knows it. The elections seem now to be dictated by surrogates, consultants who are hired from all over the country They analyze a little race in Maine. They come up with their talking points and their attack ads. They come storming into our state. They buy up our airwaves. They create the messaging. And you know as well as I do, Roger, that that is not how Maine elects its candidates, its senators, its representatives. We embrace our grassroots in our small state, but right now we're just being overwhelmed. And that's just reflected. All you have to do is turn the TV on. And the messaging is not about the candidates' positions. It's about how each can destroy the other. And that's not an election.
Yeah, and I want to bring in a question. It's a really important one. And I thank Craig Finley for raising it, which is for those tuning in, we talk about this constitutional amendment. That's a pretty big deal. What does it say? What does it do? As Craig puts it in good plain English, where's the beef? So let me orient us a little bit. As you know, David, and others on the call, the Supreme Court has gotten pretty aggressive in striking down laws that used to try to deal with this problem by allowing states, allowing the people to have some reasonable limits on the way money is used in our political system. The theory was that the First Amendment free speech right means it violates the free speech right to have any limits on what's so-called outside spending. And so that's why, in the last decade, we've seen literally $60 billion spent on elections. It's the creation of the super PAC, the 501c4s, and the money just flowing in from all these different places. We had laws that allowed us to make sure the people had a voice. The idea of free speech was it belongs to everybody, and you don't want this unlimited money to just drown everybody out. So what the amendment does, it's not set in stone. There's still plenty of time for Mainers and Americans to weigh in on what's the best way to do this. But basically, it says, no, that's not right. The free speech, First Amendment, our Constitution, our way of governing ourselves belongs to everybody. And we need to be able to make some reasonable rules that we used to have that would have some limits so that there's still plenty of money to run campaigns, ballot initiatives and stuff, but it comes from the people in smaller amounts, and particularly people who live there, and they're gonna live with the results. So that's what the amendment does. It's in 20 states, including Maine, as Amy said, have passed the resolutions calling for this amendment. Congress is getting the word, and there's a lot more growing support for it. And it will give Mainers the power to do what Mainers had the power to do before this. And it's a big issue everywhere. We're American promises all over the country. Alaska had a law struck down that limited outside money from outside Alaska, especially states like Maine, Alaska, Wyoming, overwhelmed by the money. So there's a lot of support for this constitutional amendment. And with that, David, let me ask you, we've talked a lot about this. The money is concentrated in America and around the world, frankly, especially once you start having $1 billion. And to put a point on it, the New Hampshire Senate race, Maine faces a Senate race this year that is going to be and already is a proxy for who's going to control the Senate. So you have millions coming in, not because they know or care about Maine, but because they care about who controls the Senate in Washington. In New Hampshire, 2016, same situation. $132 million spent in one Senate race, almost all of the money from outside New Hampshire in big amounts, some of which you can't trace. So David, that money's coming from somewhere. Yeah. What does it mean for Mainers, brass tacks, like people who live in Maine who may not have that kind of money? What does it mean for the way of life, or how we live? Talk a little bit about that. I've heard you talk about the urban-rural divide there. Would you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, I do appreciate that question, because for my community, and I represent sportsmen and women, conservationists, hunters, firearm owners. SAM was created to protect the rights of hunters and firearm owners, law-abiding firearm owners. And one of the biggest concerns that I have is that America is growing walls between urban areas and rural areas, where the culture, the heritage might be a little different. The way that people living in the city is certainly different than living in rural areas. Maine is a rural state. We do have a heavily populated Cumberland County, but other than that, Cumberland and a few other counties have some population, but we're mostly spread out and we're mostly rural. And the differences between urban areas like California, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, wealth is concentrated there. And it's mostly the heavily populated urban areas that are sending money to Maine to influence our elections. The laws that we will live under. The people that live in rural Maine are being inundated with ads, confusing ads, attacks. Ultimately, they're going to have to live under the laws that somebody from California wants us to implement here through either their candidate or through our referendum system. If you're in rural Maine or in rural parts of this country where this phenomenon is going on, your voice is being silenced. First of all, you can't afford to get on the TV to counter the ads because the ad rates are going so high you can't afford it. So those poor rural areas are being restricted and actually pushed out of the First Amendment. Yes, the court said money is First Amendment rights. I would have countered, if I was an attorney, Roger, you might appreciate this. I would have countered that with the court and said, based on that ruling, the more money you have, the more First Amendment right you have. Yeah, you have a right to use your money to influence an election, but do you think our founding fathers ever imagined social media, all of our media outlets, and the amount of money that could instantly be shifted around this country electronically? One of the things I've noticed in these elections is it's no longer about the candidates giving their positions on, say, healthcare and the policies associated. These consultants go out and they try to find something to attack the other candidate on. So all they talk about and all they do now in these ads is attack each other and counterattack. Well, not only are we losing our First Amendment equality, let's call it, because that seems to be a word that connects with people, they understand it. We're now coming to a place where your equality is based on how much money you have. And all parties should be concerned with that because all of us have a right to be heard. And right now, I think what's happening is a lot of those folks from particularly rural areas, a lot of the candidates can't afford to compete with billionaires who can just write a check for $10 million. I was particularly struck by Michael Bloomberg's comment recently, where he said he was going to double the amount of money he spent in the previous election, up to $60 million for a handful of Senate candidates. Think about that. There's only 1.3 million people in the state of Maine. How much money is enough? And what is going to happen with that 60 million? That he's just one example. There's millionaires in California, other, it seems like dozen or so other billionaires that are trying to dictate to us the topics in our election. And I think that's one of the areas the listeners here, I think we could all agree upon, is that we all want to hear a good debate and learn more about the individual candidates than we do these consultants spending all this money. I want to know who I'm voting for. I want to know who my senator is. I'd like to know who my representative to Congress is. How will we ever know their positions or how they're going to lead us if all we do is see all of this out-of-state money buying up our airwaves with attack ads? That's not how we should elect people.
Yeah, and you, Dave, have been elected several times. You've served, and so has your friend Roger Katz here. And I'd like to bring him into the conversation, give him a chance since you gave him a lawyer challenge here. So let's bring Roger into the conversation. You served in the Senate together. Roger Katz was one of the sponsors of the Maine resolution that inspired this constitutional amendment campaign around the country back in 2013. And I remember I first met David on this round of this work when I came up to see Ed Youngblood, another senator at the time who was behind this effort back in 2013, because I'd heard he was really troubled that this idea was a partisan issue, that it was being used by one side who might not really, actually follow through. And I was worried he was ready to give up. So we had a coffee together, and it was clear he really thought Mainers and Maine could work together across partisan lines to do what's right and help get this done. But you've both been there in Augusta. You've served. Roger, can you touch a little bit on your involvement with this? Feel free to share any stories about David that we don't know.
Oh, no.
And you guys, you're both Republicans. How do we get a super majority that actually all agree with us already? If you talk to people who aren't in politics, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they're all for this. How do we get the politicians to actually do this across partisan lines? Let me first ask Roger, and then David, jump in.
Yeah, I think it's a doable thing. First of all, as far as David Trahan is concerned, if I was a good senator or a bad senator, either way, it's all David's doing, because he was my mentor when I was there in my first term, and I learned a great deal from Senator David Trahan. But David reminded me about the referenda issue, and I'm sure he's going to hopefully speak more to that later. But when you think about it, the referendum system was really set up as a way to make sure that the people themselves had the power. If politicians weren't doing the job because of the impact of lobbyists or whatever, this was a safety valve that allowed ordinary grassroots organizations to raise these things in elections. And it was a way of taking power away from the moneyed class, if you will. And unfortunately, what's happened, it's really been tipped on its head. In fact, of all the referenda we've had recently, I think most of them have one thing in common. They've been ginned up by people from out of state, whether they are conservative-oriented referenda or more progressive-oriented referenda. They've come from out of state, in part because we're a cheap date. And you mentioned Wyoming, and I think a couple other rural states. It's so easy to invest money in Maine and get a huge bang for your buck because of that. So when we're done, maybe David could talk more about his experience with Sportsman's Alliance in Maine, because I know that's almost a poster child for what the problem here is now. It isn't a Republican or a Democratic issue. I just watched the evening news tonight. I don't know how many ads there were bashing Susan Collins, bashing Syria Gideon. It doesn't matter who you're for. Mm-hmm. And I think Amy's done the research, but I think it's something like 3/4 of that money that's paying for those is coming from people from out of state. And we don't even know really usually who they are, because the disclosure laws are so weak. So it is large out-of-state money, and it is on both sides. There are obscene corporate contributions in the state of Maine from out of state. There are obscene labor union contributions into the state of Maine from out of state. There are extremely wealthy people, think the Koch brothers, who are putting large amounts of money into Maine. On the other side, on the far left, there are extremely wealthy people like George Soros who are doing it. So it's an equal opportunity problem here. It is affecting both Republicans and Democrats. And it's also really making its way into impacting on legislative races as well, because national organizations are bundling money from wealthy organizations and individuals, pouring it into Maine with similar ads during November to try to, October, November, to try to impact who's going to control our legislators. So it's a big problem. But the good news I think is twofold. One is that most people, I think, as you just said, Jeff, support the concept of some limits on campaign financing. And secondly, it is now becoming a more of a cross-partisan and a bipartisan issue, particularly here in Maine. But so that's my 2 cents. But I'd like to throw it back to Dave, if I could, Jeff, and ask him to talk a little bit about his referenda experience and how the out-of-state money has really, again, as he says, crowded out Maine voices on making these decisions.
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, because that's where I really have my passion is in the referendum system. I've used it for people's veto that was successful. I've been on the opposing side of referendums, and they really are a grassroots engagement between Maine people. But in the recent time, and I think there's only like 24 states that have a referendum system. Maine is one of the more liberal. So when an organization wants to promote a national agenda policy, they look at that handful of states with liberal referendums like Maine, and that's where they send their money and they do their referendums. Not because it's needed there, but because it's an easy place to win. And there's other states around the country that are facing, Colorado, I think is one of them, where that referendum system can be a petri dish to experiment with a policy, and one individual or a few individuals can really buy a law. And that's what happened during I'll start with the bear referendum. That was one that came from the Humane Society of the United States. And I use this as an illustration of what I just said. When they sent out a mailer, and I did save the mailer, we in Maine, we have black bears. We don't have grizzlies. And the Humane Society of the United States sent out a mailer with a picture of a grizzly family and said we needed to protect these animals. We don't even have grizzlies in Maine. This was just a stamp, a rubber stamp of a prototype referendum they were using all over the country. And it was that year they decided to go after Maine. Well, thank goodness Maine people saw through it and they defeated it. A few years later, we did a gun referendum. We were outspent 8-1 by Michael Bloomberg's organization. Again, Maine people rejected it. But what has happened, at the same time that some of these have been rejected, there have been others that were outspent virtually no dollars, out-of-state efforts, and they passed laws through the referendum system. Our organization represents 30 fish and game clubs. I meant to say 60 fish and game clubs representing 30,000 people around our state. In addition, we partner with a number of other organizations that can reach another 25,000. So we do have a little bit of a reach. The only way that I believe we were able to defeat those out-of-state efforts was first of all that we had such a grassroots effort. But again, we're only one policy area. If there's not a Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, ILA, representing other segments of policy, whether it's the chamber or other policy areas, it's like a tidal wave of money just comes swarming in. And then it just overcomes everything, and there's no voice to counter it. So if you own the airwaves and the other side can't get on, you got a good chance to pass something. That is not what the referendum system is supposed to be. Roger nailed it on the head. It's when Maine people feel like the legislature's not moving fast enough on a policy, they can bring a referendum. It's not a experimental petri dish for a billionaire to experiment with a law that he'll never, or she will never have to live under. Think about that. They're dictating to us the laws that pass in the state of Maine, but they're not affected by them. If you want to own our state's lawmaking process and elect its candidates, you should have to live in our state.
Yeah, you know, one of the Supreme Court cases that we talk about is why a constitutional amendment is necessary. It's actually the constitutional power for the people to correct the Supreme Court when it goes awry, and it's been used 8 times. 8 of our 27 amendments reverse Supreme Court decisions. So this is normal when the people realize things aren't working well and get it fixed. But one of those cases struck down state laws saying just that the referenda are citizens' initiatives. They should be funded by citizens, i.e. not global corporations. And the whole point of the initiative was to allow the people to go around a corrupted system or a system that wasn't responding. And you know, Azor Cole, our state manager on the screen here, one of the first things he did when he came to American Promise was help Massachusetts become one of the 20 states passing a ballot initiative to support this amendment created a citizen commission to help move it forward and work with other states. And I want to share one story. You know, the consultants come to you and they come to you, and one of them said to us, oh, you want to do a ballot initiative. Price of admission is $9 million in Massachusetts. And, you know, we were all volunteers. We didn't, price of admission, they actually called it that. Like it's the people have to pay some price of admission. Yeah. And we said, well, you know, we don't have $9 million. We don't have $900. Let's see what we can do. And we got to work, and Azor helped lead close to 1,000 volunteers, gathering signatures, 120,000 signatures to put it on the ballot. We spent, I think, $108,000 total in the end, most of that small dollar contributions from people. We won 72+% of the, and won big. But contrast that, and I want to point this out because, you know, there's a question from Peter Garrett, our friend up in Waterville, saying, you know, 20 states isn't enough. We need more, and we got to get Congress off by getting more states. And if it was just rural states that had this complaint, we wouldn't be able to do it, right? We really need all Americans. It's why it's got to be cross-partisan. An amendment, we need 2/3 of Congress. We need ratification in 38 states. So it takes everyone. And I want to give two examples. California and Ohio, big states, big urban states in a lot of ways. Like a lot of people, overwhelmed by opioids, drug prices, they tried to do a ballot initiative to get some reasonable cost control on pharmaceuticals. They lost both. And it was, the total, I think, was over $150 million spent to defeat these ballot initiatives. And if you look at where the money came from, it was pharma, the trade association of the big pharma companies. In Ohio, there wasn't $1 contributed against it by an actual human being who lived in Ohio. Every single one of those millions and millions of dollars to defeat that initiative came from big corporations that operate around the world, let alone, you know, in the United States or Ohio. Not one human being who lived in Ohio thought it was a good idea to try to stop that, and yet it got defeated. So this amendment really does and will allow us not to say that, you know, we don't have money to advertise and promote these, you know, the information you need in a ballot initiative or campaign, but to say the money ought to be coming from Americans in small enough amounts so that everybody can participate.
Now, Jeff, I want to bring something up because for me it's important, and it cuts to who I am as when I was a legislator, and I am a leader now in my community. What I'm looking for are candidates, and I don't care what party they're from, that have the courage to step up and tell people what they stand for, instead of what I think is happening now is that all of this money is being spent to create messaging outside of the campaigns, and then the candidates aren't speaking for themselves. They're allowing these other surrogates to speak for them, and hopefully they can ride the coattails into an election and win. I'm looking for candidates that have the courage to just step in and say, let's cut all the crap away. Let's peel all these layers of garbage away so we can talk about an issue and see who has better ideas to solve a problem. That would be so refreshing in an election, to hear a candidate say, Republican or Democrat, stay out of my race. Let us have a good policy discussion, and may the best candidate win. If we had more candidates that stood up and said, you know what, Mike Bloomberg, whomever, George Soros, Koch brothers, stay out of our race. Let us have a good old-fashioned American election.
Yeah.
How refreshing would that be?
That would be refreshing indeed, but I think we're going to need an amendment to get it to happen, because
Couldn't agree more.
they don't, those folks who want to spend millions of dollars to control the state legislature, they don't want to stay out. They're coming in.
It was a Pollyanna moment for me. Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I'm just.
That is the world we're going to make.
Yeah, that's romantic, I guess.
No, that's the vision. We got to have the vision to get where we're going, and that's the kind of world we want to make with this. Let me bring Amy back in, our leader, our fearless leader. I'm probably way off time. I've been enjoying this conversation, and Amy, you've got a chapter full of great leaders, gathered hundreds of actually thousands, excuse me, of Mainers signatures on Stand with Maine. Join the conversation, shoot questions you or your chapter members may have, and Azor's monitoring the questions too, so jump in. But share a little bit about what brought you, Amy, to this, and what you see as the most effective way that Dave and Sportsman's Alliance can help across the state to win this thing.
Sure. Well, Jane Gallagher is going to be speaking in just a minute too, but I'll let Azor tell me when the time is exactly right for Jane to start, as well as Azor let us know what questions are coming in. But just to get us started, you know, I think that we all have slightly different reasons for getting involved in Stand With Maine. I think, you know, that it's interesting to hear all different perspectives, and the bear baiting example is an interesting one for sure. I think, you know, we could all come up with examples that range from climate change to the opioid crisis to the you know, the national deficit to very Maine specific issues as well. And I think that the most important thing for us right now is just to get the word out. Stand With Maine, we are trying to gather 10,000 signatures by the election in November. And we have an interesting time coming up. We have what we're calling 10 Days of Unity. And this is just a way to kickstart our signature campaign to let as many people know as possible about our initiative, Stand With Maine, to sign the petition. And Jane Gallagher is planning to talk more about that. Azor, is this the right time for Jane to join in?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a fantastic time to bring Jane into the conversation to give just a really specific list of things that people can do to get involved. And then we'll continue hearing from our panelists, because I think it will kickstart a conversation. But Jane, I'm going to promote you to a panelist here to talk a little bit more about what specifically people can do to get involved. And thank you so much for your leadership in helping grow this grassroots movement. And I think you should be able to activate your video and unmute yourself here in just a second. All right.
I think I'm unmuted now.
We can hear you crystal clear.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, Amy, thank you. And thank you to everyone for being here, especially people who might be new to Stand With Maine or to our American Promise local Maine chapter. Super excited to have more people join the effort. And I also really want to acknowledge Jeff and Kimberly, who I don't know if she's on the call, but Azor, you as well, for organizing this call and for providing so much support for our chapter. I can say that my concerns echo Dave and Roger's, and that I think that all parties should be concerned about this. This is a big problem. And just a little bit of background for me, my husband and I moved to Maine almost 23 years ago because we love the outdoors. So I think we have a lot of concerns in common. As Amy mentioned, when we launched the Stand With Maine effort in Brewer in January, seems like a lifetime ago, we set a goal of collecting 10,000 signatures between that launch and the November election. Our end game is to show all of our candidates and elected officials that Mainers are serious about a 20th Amendment and that it would be wise for them to pledge their support too. So at first, that 10,000 signature goal seemed pretty daunting. But in March, a bunch of volunteers went to the polls. It was a small group of people and we only got to 3 or 4 polling locations, but quickly gathered over 800 signatures. So we kind of got our hopes up after that. Amy actually said a few weeks ago that if we could show up at the polls on July 14th, which would be wonderful, we could have more people and we could probably collect all 10,000 signatures that day. But in the time of COVID, we can't be at the polls. That's not going to happen. So as Amy mentioned, we've switched to an online effort. and that required us to get a little bit creative. But from July 4th, which is Independence Day, through the 14th, which is the primary election day, we're going to launch and run this 10 Days of Unity. And we're asking our members and anyone else who wants to join us to take a few minutes each day and do something for Stand With Maine. So quick overview of what we're suggesting. And if you're, don't worry about remembering any of this, because there will be emails following with all of the information and lots of links to resources that can make the tasks super easy. But the few examples we came up with are: day one, join our Facebook group. There will be posts every day that you can share on your own social media, which is kind of hilarious that I'm saying that, since I am clueless about social media, but I'm gonna try, and I hope you all will too. Day two, sign the petition if you haven't already, and ask 10 friends to share it and sign it too. Day three, write a quick letter to the editor, to a local paper, sharing why you support the Stand With Maine effort and why you signed the petition. Day four, call candidates running in your local primaries and ask them to sign the Stand With Maine petition. Day five, watch the documentary Dark Money. That might take more than 10 minutes, but the trailer is really good, and that's only 3 minutes, I understand. Day six, call each member of our congressional delegation, so our senators and our representatives, and ask them to sign the Stand With Maine petition. Day seven, add an online comment on one of the op-eds supporting Stand With Maine that are going to be appearing in the Bangor Daily News and the Portland Press Herald any day now. Or you could also share those op-eds through social media if you do that sort of thing. Day eight, you could check out American Promise's resource page that has tons of information and other ideas for ways to support, not just Stand With Maine, but to support American Promise across the country. Day nine, you could reach out to friends who have liked or commented on your posts and circle around to them to see if they actually did sign the petition. And day 10, circle back to the 10 friends you reached out to on day two and check in and ask them if they've already reached out to a group of people to reach out to another group. So those are some ideas that we came up with, and we hope that you'll take a look and figure out what you can do to help us get to that 10,000 signatures. Actually, our goal for this 10 days is to get to 2,500 signatures. So I have one last comment about all of this, and that is that for me, all of this effort is not just about the signatures. In fact, I think the more important outcome of this process is that we're growing a network of people here in Maine who care deeply about the integrity of our democracy, who care about hearing Maine voices and not those of outside interests, which you've heard a lot about from Roger and from Dave already. People who care about keeping our representatives accountable. Because after we pass the 28th Amendment, we're going to need that network to continue the work until there are reasonable limits on money in politics. And that means until our state legislature and the US Congress pass some laws. I personally don't believe that's going to happen by itself. So this connective tissue that we're building now, with every signature we collect and with every ask to share your support with friends, or to post on social media, or to write a letter to the editor, this network building matters for the long haul. So I hope you guys will join us in our 10 Days of Unity, but if in any way that makes sense, we would love to have more people join our chapter, and it's a really great group of people, so welcome.
Jane, thank you so much. And I want to encourage people, if 10 days of work every single day sounds like a lot, we are human. We can't do it all in 6 days and then rest on the 7th. We need a little bit more time, but you don't have to do everything. As Jane said, they'll follow up with all of this, and you can step in where you can. And one great thing about being part of this national cross-partisan network of American Promise, with it's got people like Olympia Snow on our advisory council, and Al Simpson in Wyoming, and former Governor Dukakis in Massachusetts and elsewhere. But it's really about the people, and I can just assure you, we've been all over the country, everywhere. Americans are doing this, and it is really exciting because it's it's not just about the result, as Jane said. It's like we are realizing things have gone too far. It's out of control, and we're actually practicing self-government again, practicing what government of the people looks like. And if we can do the biggest thing Americans do, a constitutional amendment, there's no end to the good things we can do together after we win this amendment. So David, let me give you a little bit more of the last word, and we'll go back to some Q&A and some next.
Yeah,
I've talked to you about, you've been to Russia, you've been all over the place, you have a deep experience of this, but I know you probably want to jump in on this idea of actually governing together as people and Americans and Mainers.
Well, I think the irony here is that the referendum system that I'm so concerned with, if we could get an amendment to the Constitution at the federal level, the people that are sitting in this room could use the referendum system to one day bring forward legislation to achieve what we're talking about. And that point that you had made earlier, Jane, I believe it is. I'm sorry, I can't. The reflection.
Jane Gallagher.
Yes. If you can get Diane Russell, myself, and Roger Katz on the same page out there to push a referendum together, and people from the diverse politics of this coalition, it'd be an amazing moment in the history of this country. Given the trends and the direction that we're all going now, it seems like to do something like this, I think could catch on and change, I guess, our elections across our country. And right now, I can't think of anything that's more desperately needed. I, as a voter, even though I'm the director of SAM, I feel robbed because I'm losing touch with the people that represent me. Because of all the noise, this gray noise around us, all this money, I just feel like I'm trying to be an informed voter, and it's becoming more and more difficult all the time. So I look forward to being part of a coalition like this. I can tell you that in my history as a legislator, I like to take on big challenges. We have a medical errors reporting law in the state because of my efforts. We have a government oversight agency people told me would never be created. There's just been so many efforts that I've worked on in referendum with other people. And in all of those, I never asked a single person what party they were from. We were just working for a common cause that we all believed in. And isn't that sort of the American dream in our elections? Is that as an individual, you can make a difference in our world? And I hope all of us recognize that that's what we're talking about, trying to get back to, is that you can start a fire as one person and maybe you can change the world. That's how I grew up. When I was a kid, that's what I aspired to, was that belief. And I think that's what this effort really represents.
Yeah, the kind of work Jane described inspires it to be renewed again. So this 10 days of unity is super exciting. And I know so many people on this call and well beyond are going to participate. We've all found, you do one thing and you don't actually get tired. You get fired up to do the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
And I know some folks have some questions, and I know we're running out of time. I love questions. Is it possible we could get to a few of those? I'd love to.
I've been bringing some in. Some of my questions have been coming from the Quest Q&A, but Azor or Jane or Amy, bring in some more of the questions. I don't think we have the mic for folks, but they're typing in their questions on the Q&A, right?
Yeah, we've got a great question here from Deborah Smith, who asks, well, what if there is a successful citizen-led referendum that really is hypothetically reflective of Mainers, but once won, isn't enforced by politicians who are dealing with sort of the same forces of being pressured from special interest groups to maybe interpret a law a particular way to take its teeth away, or maybe just willfully ignore it altogether? How can we, I guess, sort of hold their feet to the fire? Is, I think, just a fantastic question that we can't cite of. We've got
having been a legislator myself, and I can't speak for others. I know Representative Corey's on this Zoom call, and I know that Roger was in the legislature. I don't know who else is out there as legislators. I can tell you that the theme that I heard throughout my career in the legislature was you don't mess with referendums. If you do, you might pay the price at the next election. We have a big enough coalition and we put together a referendum. Yes, the legislature can adjust that, make changes to it, but at least you can hold them accountable. And there are consequences for that. As an elected person, I would have been very reluctant to touch a referendum. So yeah, I understand the question and I appreciate it, but it's been my experience that if we did this and we passed something, yeah, we would get scrutiny by the legislature, but if they messed with it, this coalition could also take a candidate out of office. And I think that's the way our system works. There is an accountability process on election day, but right now I feel like the ability to have a voice because of all those dollars is very limited for the individual. I would say that this battle's worth fighting, and if we ever got to that place where the legislature needed to deal with it, there's other ways, and Roger and I know that. We would definitely have allies in the legislature, and it would be a dogfight. And I just don't think the legislature has the stomach for that.
Great. And Representative Corey, thank you for joining us. We are definitely going to take you up on your kind comment and question to connect up with this great group. And I know I wish I could turn on your mic, but I can't seem to do that at my end, but I will pass on your kind regards, which he is sending to you, Roger and David. And we look forward to working with you, Representative. Thank you.
Fantastic. And one more question that I think is usually good to touch on is, if you do meet an ordinary American, and I don't think there are a lot of them, and that's part of the irony we're talking about, but who really is against what we're talking about limiting the amount of money in politics, what are, the talking points that we might hear in opposition to this, and what are the easiest and most effective ways to quickly convince someone, this is just common sense?
Well, I think you're going to find very few people that are not annoyed with the amount of ads they're seeing everywhere they go. I think if you meet somebody like that, this is my philosophy. When you're leading and in your heart you're on the side of the angels, and that was a term we used when we were in the legislature, some of us, when we knew we were on the right side of something and it just needed to be done. Because I think that this effort is on the side of the angels. Sometimes you're going to run into people who, no matter what you say to them, no matter what justification that you have, are never going to agree. When you identify those individuals, you step to the right, you step to the left, and you walk past. Because you need to talk to 10 people. One of the things that as a candidate, when I was running for office, I would sometimes meet people who said, I don't care if you're the last person on earth, I'd never vote for you. Have a nice day. Move to the people that you can influence. If you can talk to 5, 10, 15 people instead of arguing with one, you will have moved the goal closer to the finish line, or our goal of winning this amendment closer to that finish line. Don't get caught up in philosophical debates that you can never win.
Good point. I see it that Deborah Smith has asked a couple times. I want to just make it clear. I'm sure others have this question. Can we limit outside contributions to politicians up front now instead of waiting for this heavy work that we have to do? And we touched a little bit on that with the Supreme Court's ruling saying, no, we can't actually limit outside contributions. We do have limits, direct campaign contributions to the campaign itself. But because of the basically made up right that the Supreme Court created for money, you just put it into a PAC or a super PAC or go around it. And the limits in the federal campaigns are extraordinarily high. It's $2,800. And then if you do it with your spouse, it's $5,600. And then you can do it to the committee of this and committee of that. And basically you can directly get millions into the campaign in a way no individual ordinary Maine or American can do. David, I want to turn it to you as a question too, because you've talked about PACs a lot and how they're misused to concentrate money and sort of deprive the people of their voice and representation. Could you touch quickly on that? Response as well.
Yeah, sure. One of the problems that I have with the Maine Clean Elections Act is that individuals, you get clean election money, but if you're running a leadership PAC, if you want to raise money and still have a separate PAC, you can then go out and raise all the money you want and still go out and do the same election work that we're all trying to get under control. So I think there needs to be some reform there. I think in addition to that, C4s can be used to shelter your contributors so that folks don't know who they are. A lot of our accountability laws that we have in place now are really just reporting laws, who's giving money, that sort of thing. The intent is for the general public to know who's giving the money. But C4s, nonprofits, you don't have to disclose your contributors. And that's a shell game where people go to hide so that they can give money to an effort. If you really believe in something, put your name on it. You don't have to hide behind a loophole in the IRS rules. If you're really proud of that position, go out and justify it and let people know you're behind it. That's leadership. Otherwise, it's just hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, the citizens behind Stand With Maine are all volunteers. American Promise exists to support Americans doing this hard work around the country, and we disclose all our donors on our website, so you can look that up.
Yeah.
And, there won't be any shocking surprises. It's or big, no Cokes, no Soros's, no Steyers,
Yeah.
no Bloomberg. So we practice what we preach. So I know we only have a few minutes left.
Real quick, Jeff, I want to add to that. I'm in the same position you are. I had a call today asking if I wanted a donation for this effort. My response was, I personally, and we are not going to benefit from this in any way. I will take no money on this effort. This is on my own time because I believe in it. And I think that's important. It brings credibility to the campaign.
Great. Of course, we do need money for websites, and
I'll send them your way.
So feel free to send them our way. And
I will definitely do that.
Amy, Jane, 10 Days of Unity. We only have a few minutes. What's next?
Yeah, so in my wrap up, I can answer a question that came in as well. There was somebody asking when the referendum is going to be. And I'll just mention the fact that when we started our chapter about 1.5 years ago, we started about 50 yards down the field because Maine had already passed a referendum back in 2013. And that referendum calls for the Maine legislature to support any efforts to regulate campaign finance. So that's already in place. The purpose of Stand With Maine is to remind Mainers about that referendum and to a resolution, I'm sorry, there was a resolution in place. But in any case, because that resolution is in place, it means that all we have to do is remind Mainers that we all, as a state, are behind this effort already. And so the petition and the signatures that we're gathering are really in support of that effort and that message. We want to reach as many people as we possibly can to emphasize these ideas and let them know that through Stand With Maine, they will be enabling other Mainers to make sure their voice is heard. So how to accomplish that and get involved, email me at amy.cartmell.maine@gmail.com. And I will add you to the list of our chapter members. So in order to participate fully, you can join our chapter and receive emails from me about the activities that Jane talked about during the 10 Days of Unity, and also participate in chapter meetings moving forward. Our hope is that you will let your friends and family and coworkers and everyone you meet from now on know about this effort and join us to spread the word. So again, that's amy.cartmell.maine@gmail.com, and then be on the lookout for those emails from July 4th to July 14th. on the 10 days of unity. We're saying 10 days of unity in 10 minutes or less a day. So it won't be a long or difficult task, just quick things to help us get the word out. And thank you so much to everyone for joining on this call. We really appreciate it. It was great to hear from you, David. And again, I'd like to echo Jane and say thank you so much to Azor and Jeff for arranging this call tonight. And thank you, Roger, as well for your input.
Thank you, everybody. I really look forward to working with you all. It's so exciting, and it really does make a difference. And I know, you know, that Maine, if we do this right, Maine won't send anyone to Washington who doesn't want to see this amendment come back to Maine to be ratified, and Maine will be ready to ratify it because of our work now, so that Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and all Mainers will join together and you know, light this fire for around the country to protect our future. David, any last words?
Well, I would say that for me, just know that what you're doing is incredibly important for this country, and whatever time period you live in, leaders have to come forward to make change. And the people that I believe are on this call and on this effort are true leaders. Sometimes you have to put your party affiliation aside and do what's right for the country. For all of us, if we want to live in a civil country with the rule of law in place, we as citizens reflect our wishes, what we want in laws, how we want to live, what we want our country to look like. And how can you do that when we allow a few very rich people to dictate to us how we're going to live? So with that, go forth, be leaders, and this is one we have to win. You're on the side of the angels.
Thank you. Amy, Jane, thank you. So nice to see you both. Roger, thanks. So good to see you. Azor, thank you.
All right.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Right.